alaikum. My name is Gadir Abbas. Welcome to CAIR's Daily Dose. I'm the senior litigation attorney at CAIR National in Washington, D.C., but I am where, inshallah, all of you should be, in my house. Today, we're going to talk about inmate advocacy. And inmate advocacy has taken on particular importance in the age of the coronavirus global pandemic. Indeed, the highest rate of infection right now is a jail in New York City at Rikers Island. And we have a esteemed slate of guests. And today we also have with me a co-host, Hiba Rahim, who is the CAIR-Florida Inmate Advocacy Director. Hiba, welcome to the Daily Dose. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you, Gadir. It's my pleasure to be here with you guys.
Now, I thank you so much for taking time out of the wonderful work that you're doing down in Florida. And what's going on in Florida? What's the inmate situation in Florida these days?
I think just like the rest of the state, we're really trying to navigate how best to accommodate advocacy within the prisons. And now it's like a really unique time because you have incarcerated individuals, and our work focuses on Muslim inmate advocacy. And now you have inmates who are like in a prison within a prison. So it's a really unique situation because they're already socially isolated. They're already geographically isolated from the rest of the world. And now they're in certain lockdown compartments if, trying to contain the pandemic from spreading inside the prison walls. And so we're really trying to figure out how best to reach them, how best to continue the advocacy. Ramadan is coming up. So there's a lot of work that we're trying to do. And most importantly, we want to let our brothers and sisters who are incarcerated know that we haven't forgotten about them and that they are at the top of our priority list.
Yeah, and we've seen throughout the country, prisons and jails take different approaches in response to the pandemic. In San Francisco, where there's a really progressive prosecutor, DA that was just elected, he's almost halved the prison population there. Whereas in other places, and we have represent clients in Arkansas and in some southern states where essentially we're seeing the prisons and jails do next to nothing in response to the pandemic. And some of the things that are really upsetting is the isolation that you're talking about. Now, but there have been some prisons and jails that have taken steps. What have you seen prisons and jails do in response to the pandemic besides isolate inmates?
Right. So, I get a lot of different responses. And as we know, anybody who does inmate advocacy knows that from institution to institution, you may get a completely different picture, right? So we are in touch with family members who tell us, some of whom tell us that they are really keeping people separately. They're feeding when it's dinner time. They're trying to put people in the chow hall in very small numbers at a time so as to limit exposure. And you have other institutions where family members or the inmates themselves are writing and saying they're absolutely not doing anything at all. We're kind of same old type of situation. And so, then the onus is on us to reach out and give advice and share information. And again, let them know that even though these are difficult times and trying times, we're still here. Like I said, Ramadan is coming up. We're still here to advocate for them. One of the biggest issues that I'm getting right now is some sort of big confusion about Ramadan. Like chapel services have been canceled. So does that mean that they're going to be allowed to fast? Some inmates are under the impression that the whole fasting is going to be canceled because of terms like Ramadan has been canceled. So what does that exactly mean? How do you navigate that with the prison administration? How do you navigate that with the inmates? And just letting them know that absolutely your right to worship, your right to fast is not going to be canceled. Perhaps congregating like we normally do will take a different approach. And we, just giving them suggestions like, hey, if you're not going to allow incarcerated individuals to meet for Taraweeh or Isha or daily prayers, maybe in their dorms they can meet, and giving them advice. Remember, people who are locked up don't see the images we see of people who previously prayed in masajid 6 feet apart. So just giving them that recommendation. In your dorm, you have 4 or 5 Muslim bunkies. pray 6 feet apart, keep your distance, and just sharing those recommendations that we're seeing in images that they may not be privy to.
Yeah, and a lot of the difficulties comes with the isolation of the brothers and sisters that are incarcerated. Just as we look to our ulama and imams and masajid to give us guidance about, attending Jummah, what congregating means in these particular times, what our faith requires. These folks are dealing with a really difficult situation where a lot of places have suspended visitation. A lot of brothers and sisters who are behind bars now don't have the same connections or the same access to the outside world that they would in a normal time. And given those difficulties, I can't agree with what you said anymore, that it's up to us to double down to make sure that they're not forgotten, that they are not left behind, and that their institutions benefit from our engagement. And good things can happen. I think, can you tell me one good thing I know you have many good things, but tell me one good thing that you've seen result from the advocacy and engagement that CAIR-Florida and that you yourself lead.
Well, one of the more recent victories or successes that we've had is every Ramadan, as you know, Gadir, litigating on a national level, every Ramadan we receive an influx of grievances from inmates who are not allowed to fast in the proper way. Part of it is just like a lack of information. So within the Muslim community, we sometimes don't understand or confuse certain elements of the fast, and we have our sheikh, right, to explain it. So it's hard for us or unreasonable for us to expect that people who are trying to be accommodating, like the head levels of departments of corrections, who really do a great job at outlining the Ramadan rules and regulations and policies and procedures, but there are some nuances that they may miss. And as a result, inmates may get their suhoor too late, or their iftar too late or too early, or prayer times are off. And so one of the things that we did, CAIR-Florida did, and I know CAIR National did a great job of this as well, was to send a Ramadan memorandum to Department of Corrections, Florida Department of Corrections, that complemented the state level Ramadan memo that they send. So you have the state level memo saying these are the things that we need to do, and then you have CAIR-Florida saying, and don't forget to pay attention to these key elements that are often missed every year, and we get these grievances. So let's be proactive about it. Let's try to avoid these problems, and here's what we need to do. And offering ourselves as a resource has been really great. And the response has been generally very positive from chaplains, thanking us for that opportunity. So, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. And I think that underscores one of the most promising things about advocating for brothers and sisters that are incarcerated is the fact that this is a really resolvable issue, that true engagement, sustained engagement, strategic activism towards these prisons and jails is going to have a significant impact on the folks that are trying to adhere to Islam while they're incarcerated. And what place is Islam more important than when you have your freedom deprived? I'll never forget, we did a case out in Alaska over the last couple of years, and it was two brothers who were cellmates. One was Muslim since childhood. The other was going and experiencing his first Ramadan and was using his cellmate as his guide for that Ramadan. And during a deposition, the state of Alaska asked him about his religious beliefs and about, eating during Ramadan. And he said for iftar, it's the tradition of Muslims to offer for breaking their fast the best in the kitchen. And this is a brother that was incarcerated. So the best in the kitchen means something different there. And I think, as much as I think a lot of times folks that are incarcerated look to Muslims in the free world for guidance, I always am touched by the sincerity and the devotion that it takes to adhere to Islam behind bars, and that always serves as an inspiration for me.
And you know what, Gadir, on that note, you reminded me that there was an incident that happened in Florida Department of Corrections a few years ago that canceled any and all food donations to any religious group, and that included the dates that we used to donate for Ramadan. And so for years, Muslim inmates had been deprived of breaking their fast on a sacramental food on, and it's a sunnah, and it's so cherished by Muslims around the world. And for a couple of years in my work doing this, I had brothers and sisters asking to please see if we could get dates. And so we finally had a meeting with the head of Department of Corrections, Chaplaincy Department, and they agreed that it was in fact a sacramental food, and like other faiths have their foods for services, we could also have dates. So this will be the first year that officially across the state will be allowed to donate dates. So we've been fundraising for that, and inshallah we'll be ready to disseminate in time for Ramadan.
Alhamdulillah. We've talked a little bit about what's going on in Florida and our work nationally. Hiba, why don't you invite our guests in so we can get a little bit of a more national picture of what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very blessed to have two amazing panelists today. I'd like to invite Sister Deborah Boneta, who's the Executive Director of the Suraltul Foundation, and Ms. Veronica Laizure, who is the Civil Rights Director for CAIR-Oklahoma. Welcome to the program, ladies.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for having us.
Wa alaikum salam.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So great to be joining you all.
Welcome, welcome. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, we'll start with Sister Deborah. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the organization, what you do.
So I am the Executive Director for Suraltul, which is here in Oklahoma. And we are a very new, kind of a baby organization here, and we are one of the first organized groups to enter the Department of Corrections for the state of Oklahoma. And I have to say that we have been received so well. You know, we have been welcomed in with open arms, which was kind of enlightening and heartwarming for me. And we take care of the entire state of Oklahoma in terms of Islamic needs.
That's amazing. That's really great. And Veronica? I
am the Civil Rights Director for the Oklahoma chapter of the CAIR. I've been working with CAIR-Oklahoma since, it'll be going on 6 years now. And we have really only just started to get involved in inmate advocacy and work with the prisons and the Department of Corrections in the past couple of years, but it's been very fruitful, and I'm really excited to tell you a little bit about it.
So Veronica, tell us a little bit about it. Oklahoma is no stranger to controversy, and so I'm excited to hear what are the issues that you see in Oklahoma prisons and jails.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's helpful to have a little bit of background for the subject. So I'm going to take a moment of privilege to kind of brag on my home state. Oklahoma, up until last November, Oklahoma was the incarceration capital of the world. We incarcerated more of our citizens per capita than any other place in the world, at almost twice the national average, and almost 10 times the next lowest country on the list. So we have incredible amounts of disparities in our criminal justice system, and are very familiar with the struggles that come with being the leader in locking people up, essentially. And so that push for criminal justice reform has been going on for a long time. And one of the great things that has really helped us bolster that work is Oklahoma's very strong, very robust interfaith community. Oklahoma, as I'm sure a lot of folks know, was the site of one of the largest domestic terror attacks in history in 1995, when the federal building in Oklahoma City was bombed by a domestic terrorist. And so the interfaith community, in the wake of that tragedy, realized that there was no place for religious scapegoating, there was no place for religious bigotry and intolerance, and has really coalesced around a sense of serving one another in times of need, regardless of anyone's faith or ethnic background, and really focusing on bringing equity to the communities that we're serving. And so it's that context that affects our relationship with the Department of Corrections and the chaplaincy in particular. I was invited to join the Council for Inmate Rights and Religious Procedures at the Department of Corrections several years ago, and have really enjoyed that positive relationship As Deborah mentioned, the chaplains have been so welcoming to us and so ready and happy to use the resources that we can provide to them. And that relationship has really helped us to solve problems from kind of an amicable standpoint, rather than approaching things kind of from an adversarial point of view, which is surprising in a state like Oklahoma. But I think the chaplains that we work with, they recognize that we have a problem. They recognize that all incarcerated folks are dealing with massive violations of their human dignity. And so they're approaching it from the perspective of wanting to change that and looking for the best resources to do it.
And I think that point you make about the interfaith community being a point of leverage and the energy in the interfaith community being brought to bear on these challenges is important, because, you know, as I think we all know, when you see the level of engagement in, you know, the Christian community in terms of jail and prison advocacy, there's a whole infrastructure in place for ensuring that Christian inmates are getting the material that they need to adhere to their faith, having the space to learn about their faith. Sister Deborah, as an organizational leader that is leading a group that is active in the prison space, can you speak to some of the challenges that our community has in mustering the wherewithal to engage in prison advocacy?
Well, you know, that's an excellent question. And some of the things that we've come across, so one of the things that Suraltul also does is mentoring. And one of the biggest challenges that I see is sometimes when the people come out of the facility, our communities have a little bit of a hard time embracing them and accepting them. I have to say that, you know, there are some areas that are easier for you to come into, but we've noticed that with our community, one-on-one kind of activities do really great. So one of the challenges, or one of the advantages of Suraltul is we're able to do the mentoring program or process before they're released. And so we go in and we provide information and we provide one-on-one for them through the program so that they know, you know, what they need to do when they come out and how we need to help them when they come out. And having the advantage of having the support of CAIR-Oklahoma to help us facilitate some of these things has been really great. The chaplains this year have really reached out to make sure that they adhere to the faith of the Muslims and help them to process that. Even for the brand new Muslims that don't even know how to practice Ramadan this year or how they're going to enter into that, the chaplains have reached out and been so grateful for us to send information to assist with that.
Great. Sister Deborah, you know, one of the key issues you mentioned is when the inmates are released, we have returning citizens coming back to the masajid, kind of reintegrating them into the masajid is sometimes a problem. But one of the things that I faced is it is also sometimes difficult to find volunteers who understand the importance of this type of work to go out into the institutions and the facilities at the beginning, at the very preliminary level. So I wonder, doing this at a statewide level, how you're approaching this issue.
So we have been so incredibly blessed, alhamdulillah, to have people in other cities of Oklahoma City, especially Tulsa. We have a couple of really great sisters and their husbands that have we've talked about these issues. And so we're able to reach across the state of Oklahoma and reach some of the little places that, you know, are kind of too far away for me or the volunteers here in the metro to get to. But another thing that we have approached and worked on in the past maybe month or so has been videotapes. Department of Corrections for Oklahoma City received a grant donation for us to be able to put this information on DVDs and disseminate them through the prisons. This helps the people inside, but we also have a mentor the mentor program, you know, to try to bring in some people and show them, you know, these are kinds of the things that we need to do as Muslims, you know, and hopefully, you know, these will things that they will catch on to and see that people are people. My grandmother used to have a phrase, and she used to tell us not to be judgmental because some things will get you sent to jail and some things will get you sent to hell. So,
yes.
you know, we just kind of have to focus on those things and make sure that we're treating our brothers and sisters according to the Sunnah, that we are being loving and kind and not judgmental. And I find that a lot of people want to be involved, they just don't know how. And so we have people involved on different levels. Some help with the newsletter, some buy stamps, some help us respond to letters. And so when we take the volunteers, we don't just say, you're going to be a prison volunteer and you have to go into the prison. We ask them to what level they feel comfortable and entering this program and how they feel comfortable in being of assistance to our brothers and sisters in need.
Certainly, there are different levels. It's a different experience to go to a prison camp for low-level offenders and lead Jummah once a week. That's going to be a different experience than going to death row
oh yes, most definitely.
Someone take their shahada a couple weeks before their execution, which we've seen in Alabama. Imam Yusuf Masonette, with Nathaniel Woods, who took his shahada back in February and was just executed a couple weeks ago. In addition to the other, the challenges in the community, the challenges in mustering the organizational energy to engage the prisons and jail system, there's something going on in the news that I hear about every single day, the coronavirus. How is this, I'm going to throw this both to you, Veronica, as well as to you, Sister Deborah. How is this, a pandemic impacting your work, impacting your ability to access and provide to the needs of our Muslim brothers and sisters who are behind bars?
So I will definitely say I use a lot more stamps right now. For us, it's been different. I think that the level of fear is a little bit higher, or maybe not fear is a good word, but the level of anxiety for the people that are incarcerated has been a little higher. They get bits and pieces of news, and so they don't really know what's going on. I had a brother, his wife called me, and she said, he's afraid that he's going to come out to zombies. He hears these little bits and pieces, and he's not really sure what to come out and expect. And he thinks that maybe she's sugarcoating it for him, and so she doesn't know. And so one of the things that we have seen is definitely having the information, giving them the newsletters and giving them updated information that they would be more knowledgeable about what's coming out. The volunteers, the visiting, all of that has been kind of limited. So we're not able to go in and do those things, but we are able to send them things. We are able to get information to the chaplains and through the chaplains. And so it's kind of like a puzzle. We've just got to figure out how to get those pieces in there right. But Oklahoma Department of Correction has been wonderful to help us work with that.
Right. And, the Department of Corrections is far from perfect in our state, but I will say that the chaplaincy programs have really tried to go out of their way to make sure that all of the inmates are safe, both physically and spiritually, and also to make sure that we are preparing adequately for Ramadan and what exactly that will look like in the light of the COVID-19 crisis. No one is really sure, but we do feel really confident, and we're really fortunate that they are ready to work with us. We also are sending out a letter to the Department of Corrections, and that will go through all of the chaplains about kind of what are the needs during Ramadan, how does this differ from any other time of the year, and in particular, how can we keep in mind the safety considerations while still allowing people to practice their religion as is required. And so that conversation, I feel very confident that it will be a work in progress, but it's one where everyone comes to the table willing to at least, kind of approach it in good faith. So I think we're very fortunate in that regard.
And we do want to remind people, I've heard people say that, they're stir crazy in their homes, being at home. Can you imagine being stir crazy in that little isolated cell?
Right.
So, we have had conversations with people of other faiths where they have sent in big packets of cards, from the community saying that, we are thinking about you. We are praying for you. this will be a blessed Ramadan. Give me 5 things that we can pray for. And I think that interaction, us being able to reach past the fear into the community and love, I think is a phenomenal thing.
Yeah, it's our community. Our community includes those that are behind bars as well. I want to zero in on what seems to be a little bit of a contradiction here. Oklahoma, I recall many years ago, voted on a ballot initiative to ban Sharia law, and I think 70% of the state voted in favor of it. Mm-hmm. But yet, from both what you, Sister Deborah, are saying and Veronica, the Department of Corrections takes religious freedom in prison and jails very seriously. How do you reconcile those two things? On one hand, bigotry on the outside, but on the other hand, this embrace of religious practice on the inside.
So I can put that in one question from me, and then I'll let Veronica have it. But I believe probably the number one reason is lawyer.
What do you mean by that?
So, your religious freedoms are not something to be taken lightly, regardless of your religion. And so there is still that due process and the ability. So when people call me, it's a very friendly phone call, but I'm sure when they call Veronica as an attorney, it's a different conversation. So we do our very best in Oklahoma that they don't have to call Veronica.
Yes, and that has been really helpful too in approaching conversations with the chaplains. I'll get a complaint from an inmate, and my first step can be to approach the chaplain at that facility and say, hey, I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Maybe you're lacking in information or resources. I don't want to sue you. Here are the things that we can do so that I don't have to sue you. And that framework for the conversation, I found, has gotten us a lot of resolutions. And then now having Suraltul existing as a statewide service that kind of can process these things through a central line has been tremendously helpful. And so a lot of times it's just connecting the dots. And Oklahoma is an interesting place. It's a place full of contradictions. Everything from the fact that it was 90 degrees this week and we're expecting, we have a chance of getting snow this weekend. And yes, there are lots of people with a lot of deep misunderstandings, particularly in the realm of how that Sharia law amendment was passed and then challenged. But the standing of CAIR as the legal challenger to an unconstitutional law and our continued presence at the Capitol and in the courtrooms to show that we don't take these things lightly. We are always stand ready to challenge the unconstitutional religious intolerance that comes out of our state. That has been a very powerful movement that helps galvanize the interfaith community. Having them there, we help them and they help us.
Great. Well, thank you guys very much. And as we wrap up, there are community members who are watching, and there are family members of inmates who are watching. And so I wonder what advice you have to community members in terms of how they can support our incarcerated brothers and sisters, especially during this COVID pandemic, and also to family members. What message would you like for them to relay to their incarcerated loved ones across the states?
So for me, I would say most definitely, additional money for them. And that's in kind of our wish list for our families that are incarcerated. Extra money when they have it, extra notes of encouragement, definitely donations to the organizations that are buying the dates and providing the iftar meals, should we be able to do that. It's very unknown for us. So I would tell them to operate and give in the moment in the day. So today, maybe you send a note. Maybe tomorrow you make a donation. And so those things we definitely have to address for their family. Does your family have enough stuff from the canteen to stay in their cell?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Veronica?
I would also encourage, in addition to kind of the responding to existing immediate needs, I also encourage people to look at how we got here and to look at the structural issues behind why their loved one or why their community member is behind bars. Mm-hmm. Oklahoma did not become the world's incarceration capital overnight. It was over a series of policies that were proposed and voted on, and a group of elected officials who use their position to lock people up in order to further their own career. And so I encourage people to get involved in civic advocacy, to know your ballots, to not just vote for presidents and for federal representatives, although those are vital right now, but also to look down the ballot at the DA races. Oklahoma's DAs are all elected. And to look at the judges that are elected, to look at what your elected official is doing about criminal justice reform. And so as much as we are responding to the real-time needs of the people who are currently incarcerated, we're also looking at the structural problems and the flaws in the system that put them there in the first place. Oklahoma in November just commuted the sentences of 462 inmates, which actually bumped us out of the #1 incarceration spot. And that was through the work of some really phenomenal advocates and allies on the ground who have been pushing for these criminal justice reforms. And so if we want change, it is possible, but we have to fight for it and we have to vote for it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great points. Well, closing question to you both. Ladies, if you had a billboard and your organization wanted to disseminate one main message, what would it be to those driving past?
Oh my goodness. Incarceration is not to be thrown away. I mean, just because someone is incarcerated doesn't mean that their life has less value than yours.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I would borrow a quote from one of my colleagues, Rabbi Harris, here in Oklahoma City, who says, she always uses this, and I love it. It's love one another, every single other. And that means people who don't look like you, don't have the same existence of you, don't have the same life experiences or beliefs, but love every single other.
Absolutely. And I would borrow your grandmother's quote. Maybe put that on my billboard.
I'm a kind of unorthodox Muslim woman, so that might be
wonderful, mashallah. One thing that I remind our community all the time is that, subhanAllah, to the Muslim community, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested different individuals in different ways. And when we are born into a life of certain privilege, then it is unbecoming of us, and it is irresponsible of us to look at others in their trials and tribulations with any degree of arrogance or lack of responsibility. What Allah gives us is our responsibility to give back. And I also remind our Muslim brothers and sisters that this work is fard kifaya. It is an obligation on our community in its entirety. And unless there's a strong group of individuals that are doing it, it is the onus on each and every one of us to step up and act forward. And I'll tell you one thing, and I'll end with this for me. When the Muslim brothers in the communities I have visited say, Sister Hiba, is it appropriate for you to visit prisons? I say, brother, step up and I'll step back.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
So alhamdulillah, this work, there is a plethora of work to do, and it is such an honor to be on a panel with individuals, to have you as guests on the show, and really to see what work other people are doing. And inshallah, we'll just connect those resources. The more and more we meet and know each other, the more resources we can connect and support we can give each other. And in giving each other that support, we're also giving it to our incarcerated brothers and sisters, and then working on phase 2, which is how to receive them with love and respect and compassion when they re-enter the communities, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Thank you so very much.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining the Daily Dose. We'll see you tomorrow.